matters of decorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Nothing really about the cane. Every so often I need a cane to walk with, and if I'm going to have a cane to walk with, it should be a cane that looks like it belongs to a villain from Speed Racer. At the moment, I just need something to do with my hands. I've been asked to talk about my design process for writing role-playing games. That seems like a good thing to talk about. I'm kind of proud of my role-playing games and the process behind them, even if it's a little chaotic. But I think I can boil it down a little bit. Before you decide to engage in writing a role-playing game, you might want to have a little background. By which I mean play some role-playing games. Played a lot of role-playing games, actually. I'm not talking about spending 5-6 days a week rolling dice and talking with people around a table. I'm talking about get involved in a couple of games, 2 or 3. Get with groups that don't mind changing games out every so often. Don't just play one. Because you want to write these things, you want to have a solid grounding of what makes them work, and more importantly, what doesn't make them work, or what makes them not work. You want to have that set of examples and an idea of how different people have brought flow to their games. Now, when you talk about writing a role-playing game, there's 2 different things involved in that, and they can be independent of each other. There's the system and there's the setting. The system is the rules by which everything happens. How do you define what goes on and what makes a character and what are the mechanics for making the characters do things. The setting is the world that those people are going to be walking around in and being active in and doing things. A lot of role-playing games incorporate both. There's rules for doing things in this particular setting. If you're talking about an official role-playing game for a licensed property, like Star Wars, the role-playing game, or Babylon 5, the role-playing game. I don't know if there's one of those out there, but there should be because I love Babylon 5. Then they have both of those in there. Having both your system and your setting in the same book is certainly an option. If you have something like the generic universal role-playing system, GURPS, or my victory system, that's just a system. And you can then take that system and apply it to a number of different settings. Or, as I have discussed with people in the past, if you've got a really good setting, sometimes you don't really need a system. The system can be the least important part of a role-playing product. If you're really good setting, but really bad system, then people will discard the system and use the information on the setting. It all depends on what part of it you really want to throw yourself into. If you think you've got a good idea for a system, write a system. We need more systems out there. If you don't feel like throwing yourself into it and just want to play in the intellectual property of the setting, well, play in that. So, that's how I'm breaking it down. Writing the system, writing the setting. The system is where the real nitty-gritty is and where a lot of background can come in handy. When I was writing Hot Chicks, the role-playing game, it came down to, system-wise, what experience did I want the players of this game to have? Did I want them to be sitting down and working out their maneuvers over a good long period of time to deal with it with a number of different dice rolls to accomplish a single action? Or did I want it to be simple, smooth, fast? Boom, I've got a number. Boom, I've got a dice roll. Boom, I go. And I kind of went towards the latter. You have to decide, is my system going to be fast and easy, or is it going to be somewhat complex? And that involves a number of different factors. How much detail do you want to put in this system? A role playing system can be considered coarse or fine. It's the graininess of the system. It talks about detail. If you've got very few statistics, if you're not keeping track of too much for the individual character or the individual character actions, and it's all handled in big, broad strokes of storytelling, that's a coarse system. If you get into it very detailed and account for a lot of different factors and try and get as close to a realistic and properly calculated result as possible, it's a very fine system. As examples, the D6 system used for the D6 Star Wars game, that's pretty coarse. Toon is a coarse system. In many ways, Fate or Savage Worlds are a coarse system. GURPS is a very fine system. The old Tritax system, also very fine. Any system where you need to roll percentile to see which flange in the hand you hit. If you accidentally hit someone in the hand, that's very fine. Both sides have their advantages. On the course side, you're getting through tasks and resolution very quickly, but it's lacking some of that, the power to tell you what everything means. The game master and the players are having to fill in an awful lot of detail in their imagining of the action that's happening. In a fine system, it takes a little while longer to determine everything that's going on, but you know everything that's going on to a much greater level of detail. The players and GMs don't have to imagine quite so much because there's more information given to them when they resolve a task. I went on the coarse fine scale more towards the coarse, not all the way over. There's a good bit of detail that you can get into, but a lot of it's optional. It does not get very detailed because I prefer speed of play. That's another factor. Coarse plays fast, or it should. And fine tends to play a little bit slower. It all depends, how long is it going to take 4 people to get 1 round of combat done? In the course system, it's not that long. In a fine system, it can take a little while. That also, however, depends on your mechanic. Once you have the coarseness or fineness determined, another major determiner of how fast things are going to run and the experience that people are going to have is how do you resolve tasks and conflicts. In a role-playing game, no matter how good the character or how much success you want involved in the story process going forward, there will be times when neither the players nor the GMs knows for a fact what is going to happen. If I'm going to succeed this next task or fail this next task. I might have a better chance to succeed or fail, but there's a random factor involved. The traditional model for resolving this is to involve dice, polyhedrals. It's not the only way to do it. It's a fast and easy way to generate random numbers. It revolves around people having a certain amount of equipment, that being the dice. Friendly local gaming stores are getting a little harder to find, but a quick trip to Amazon or a little searching online will get you any number of sources of very good dice for use in gaming. You could use any random number generator. You could use cards, or doesn't even need to be a number generator. There are systems that use Rochambeau pretty well. I like the probabilities and varieties offered to me by dice. I struggled with math all the way through school into college. The last math course I ever took was a course titled, I kid you not, Finite Mathematics for Liberal Arts Majors. It was supposed to be the highest level of math I'd ever really have to deal with. Which it really wasn't, but. And that gave me a good survey of a number of different topics, calculus, hard geometry, and statistics and probability. You'll want to know a little bit of something about statistics and probability if you're going to be designing a dice mechanic. It doesn't have to be a college course or even college level information. Most of this information I got from playing a lot of different games and looking at how their dice mechanics worked. I've talked about the flatline distribution versus the bell curve distribution, and that's a decision it's time to make. What are my mechanics? And mechanics means digging into what constitutes a character and what constitutes things in that character's environment. How is a character going to start doing things? When you're talking about a role-playing game, that usually means combat. Every role-playing game has a system of combat. It's one of those things that lends to there being reputations for violence in role-playing games. It's not so much that role-playing games are inherently violent. It's that combat is complicated and entertaining. The literature that we are most often emulating when we are playing role-playing games involves combat. Whether it's lightsaber duels or sword fights or kung fu or fighter duels, there's combat. But more than combat, there's task resolution. I need to change a light bulb. I need to hack a computer. I need to fix my car. So how do people do that? Now it's time to come up with character generation. How do characters look in this game? Again, traditionally, you are breaking down physical and mental qualities to a numeric value. How smart is this person? How strong is this person? How precise is this person? How much punishment can this person take? And a range of numbers usually works best. In classic Dungeons and Dragons and in many D20 type systems to this day, a scale of 3 to 18 works really well. The number 3 to 18 is, why not 1 to 20? Because 3 to 18 is the range of numbers that you can roll on 3 6-sided dice. Everything from 3 1s to 3 6s, and everything in between with a median between 9 and 12 bell curve. That's pretty good. That works if you're randomly generating your statistics. Do you randomly generate statistics, or do you assign statistics somehow, perhaps a point-buy system? Hot Chicks has both. Same system as in Victory. You can randomly roll, or you can use a purchase system to acquire your statistics. I like numeric systems. You can go by other forms of determining what describes your characters, because that's what you're doing. You're describing the characters and the characters' qualities. Course define. A course system doesn't define much about a character. This is how strong they are. This is the things that they can do. They might be able to do this special thing and go. It's all painted in very broad strokes and relies on the imagination of the player and the game master to fill in the details. A find system lets you pinpoint very detailed information about a character, from their backstory to where they're personally trying to get to and what they can do in very fine detail. Traditionally, there are statistics to cover their gross abilities, their strength, their dexterity, their intelligence. And then there are systems of skills. These skills also very broad to very detailed and fine. I'm somewhere in the middle on that, again, with the victory system. There are a set number of skills. We've got, I haven't counted, but we've got probably close to 50 skills on the character sheet. Higher than that. I better count one of these days. But it's a set number of skills. That's what you have to work with. A very simple system can have descriptors of broad areas of expertise. He hits things and he is good at working locks. A very detailed system, GURPS has hundreds of skills, and you need those. And it allows you to get a very detailed division between the capabilities of different characters. Somehow that skill interacts with the statistic, usually adding together for particular roles, and then you compare that number to a chart, or you use that number as a target and apply your random number generator to determine your success or failure at using that skill. If it sounds complicated, it's because I'm trying to paint this all in very broad strokes. And I don't want to tell you how to design your game. There's a lot of different ways to do this. A lot of different ways to do this. In the OGL D20, you get a certain amount of bonus from the statistic that you have. You add bonuses from ranks in a skill you may have, and that becomes your bonus. So you roll a D20, you add your total bonus, and if you have hit your target number for the difficulty of the task you're trying to do, you have succeeded. In the victory system, you add your statistic to your skill and roll a d20 and compare it to that number. And if you have hit that number or less, then you have succeeded. In GURPS, it is stat plus skill, roll 3 die 6, try to get under. In Fusion, it's stat plus skill, roll 3 die 6, try to get over. Storyteller. Your stat plus your skill gives you a number of d10s. You roll your d10s and see how many successes on those d10s you get. There are a lot of different ways to do this. And if you have played a lot of role-playing games, you will have seen these systems used and gotten a feel for them. Maybe you want a system that uses all of your polyhedrals. Well, I never get to use my D4s or my D8s. What if we use those for simple resolution? And you have a system like Savage Worlds that works. But if you have a different idea of how things work out, maybe it will work. Maybe you'll get the system that they used in Cthulhu Tech, the Framework system, which looks good on paper and is absolutely abominable to try and actually play with. Having determined how coarse or fine your game is going to be, and having set down how you're going to define characters and how you're going to apply the mechanics to those characters to determine whether the characters succeed or fail before you get a step further. Whip out a sheet of paper, make a character sheet out of it. This is not going to be your final version, not even close. Put some numbers on that character sheet, roll some dice. See what works, see what doesn't. When we were designing Hot Chicks, Vicky and I had a character in mind. He was perfectly average by the system through every iteration of the system, and his name was Bob. Bob tries to shoot a guy. What happens? How does Bob punch this thing? I shoot Bob. How does Bob handle that? Okay, I shoot Bob with a 9mm pistol. How's he doing? I shoot Bob with a 50 cal. How's he doing? We did horrible things to Bob for months, trying to work out exactly how we wanted this system to go. Well, Bob's the average. What happens if someone's under average? Well, Bob shoots someone who's under average. Ooh, that didn't go well, did it? Bob shoots someone who's above average. Our guns need to do more damage. Okay, Bob shoots him with a new gun. Ooh, that's about right. That looked messy. Bob shows up as a character in the flavor text of Hot Chicks and is actually statted up in our source book, Nth Degree, because we like Bob. Bob developed a personality over time as we got him involved in more things. Bob gets drunk. How does this work? You need a Bob. You need a character that is going to be your crash test dummy for your system. And you need to use him a lot. Because you're writing this system, you need to see how it's working constantly as you go along. Bob needs another statistic because he's missing. Well, assign another statistic. We need this skill because Bob can't do this. Okay, put that skill on the character sheet. I worked backwards, kind of. First, we made a character sheet. Then I went back and I wrote the rules that supported the character sheet. Because I wanted people's experience to be very fast, very jump up at the table and yelling when you get a success, which is also why there's a flatline distribution in the game. A D20 is a wonderful random number generator. Its math is really simple. There's an even chance of getting any number on that D20. If you were to work out a median, it'd be between 9 and 12, but it's kind of just a blip on the flat line scale. You can also work out percentages based on it very easily by multiplying by 5. I need to roll a 1. Well, it's a 5% chance. Easy. 17? Oh, well, that means he's got a 85% chance. Boom. Yeah, I can multiply by 5 in my head really fast now. So, benefit of going through this process for years. You need to fail a lot. You need to come up with a system that doesn't work, because your first system isn't going to work. Your second system isn't going to work. Before there was the inverted 20 system that we created for Hot Chicks, there was duododecahedron, which is quite a mouthful, and we tried to resolve everything with a roll of two 12-sided dice, because that seemed avant-garde. Who's got two 12-sided dice? People are going to have to go out and buy dice to play our game. Wait a second, that's not cool. I still got a pile of duodecahedron character sheets in my file cabinet over here. There's character sheets for Bob in there in duodecahedron. And we failed miserably to create a system called duodecahedron, but you can see in those character sheets the glimmerings of what was going to become the inverted 20 system and the victory system over time. Where we didn't have information, there was a lot of Googling involved. Because when you're working out what these characters can do, we wanted it to be something close to what human performance was. And there's ways for characters in the system to exceed human performance, but we wanted to have that baseline. I think it was Dragon Comic that started a comic strip called Joe Gennaro that talked about the capabilities of the perfectly generic, average character in every system. And we wanted our Joe Gennaro, our Bob, because Bob was our perfectly average character, to match up to perfectly average people. Oh gosh. So I'm sure I'm on some kind of list now, but I Googled athletic records and lots of things on how far can people throw things, how fast can people run, how far can people jump, how much distance can someone get after they run as opposed to if they're standing still. There are statistics for all of these things, secondary statistics or performance statistics in the victory system. And the math to make it all work. You know, you tell people in high school that they're going to need algebra. And of course, a lot of us are believing that we don't need algebra. I need algebra. Oh my God. Because I had to take these statistics that I was using for task resolution and make them work for calculating performance. That was not easy. It involved a lot of research. It involved me throwing myself at a couple of brick walls, writing down numbers over and over again and failing. Fail faster. That's a wonderful design principle. You need to fail, and you need to fail a lot because you're not going to get success without a number of fails. I came up with 100 formulas for generating statistics for running and jumping that did not work. And the faster I came up with them, the faster I got to my success. Fail faster. Vic and I worked hard to figure out how far someone could throw a pound. We put a pint of water into a 2-liter bottle, because a pint is a pound the world around, went to the beach and threw it. I have a little bit more muscle mass than Vic, or at least at the time I had more muscle mass than Vic, but I'm not an accurate person and haven't put a lot of time into learning how to throw things. Vic has put a lot of time into learning how to throw things. So this gave us a couple of baselines. One, about how far can people throw things? Two, what is the difference between someone who has very little skill but a higher strength compared to someone throwing who has less strength but more skill? And that all factored in. We worked out the throwing formulas from factoring both things in: skill, strength, how they apply, and what do you get. We occasionally wrote reality checks. We went and checked what the real world values of these performance statistics were and then made them apply to the characters. Eventually, you get to something that starts to work for you. You fail enough, you see how your successes start stacking up, and you stack them up in one place. I didn't want people to have to refer to a chart over and over again. No, I rolled this dice. What does that mean? Let me check the chart. If you put the stat and the skill together on the victory system character sheet, you know what your target number is. The game master may assign some bonuses or penalties. Well, I've got this piece of equipment, so that gives me a +2. Well, it's dark. That's a -4. Totally dark? Yeah, totally dark, -4. Can I light a match? You get get it to a -3? Yeah, you can do that. Once you have your bonuses to add, your penalties to subtract, you have your number. That or less on a D20. You don't need a chart. There's even a page on the back where you can, the fourth page of the character sheet, is a sheet where you can tally up your more regular rolls, things you're going to be doing over and over again. Well, this is my notice roll. This is my roll to hit. This is my roll to dodge. And I can't get people to use that page for the life of me. Not when I'm running or not when I'm suggesting. And here's a plug for the fourth page of my character sheet. Use the damn fourth page. Don't make me sit there as your game master while you calculate the same number that you used 8 times tonight already again. Sorry. A little frustration is going to come out. And just turn to the fourth page. Oh, look, there's my number. Boom. Simple. But because you can apply different skills to different statistics to perform different types of tasks, well, I'm going to shoot my gun. That's Dex plus firearms. What kind of gun does that guy use? Oh, that's intelligence plus firearms. I want to see how far that thing shot. It's perception plus firearms. You are going to be making that calculation, but it's addition. It's straight addition. In the middle of the game, not that bad. That speeds things up. If the character sheet has all the information you need, that speeds things up. If you're referring to charts in other places, slows things down a little bit. I like things fast. When I was designing hot chicks, I started out wanting to design something very fluffy, very, very super coarse, very fluffy, very little actual content in it. A joke system. But I had this game growing in my head. The Curse of the 4th edition hit me really hard, and I wanted something that I was happy with. So a more complex game came out of it. And I wanted it to have everything. What does your system account for? I wanted magic in my system. Well, now I can't reality check anymore. Now I just have to decide what effects does magic have. And that's straight off the top of my head. Boom. Teleport. It does this. When we designed hot chicks, there was very little consistency in these factors because it was off the top of our head. I just got a spell. It does this. It does this much damage and it costs what? This? Sure, that's good. And when you're dealing with things that don't exist, that's fine. That's fine. At least, in my first game, that worked okay. But there were problems with consistency. We nailed that out in Victory, getting to that. But I wanted the equipment in Hot Chicks to match up pretty well to real world numbers. Close. I was never going to get it 100% close. And that meant I wanted to look at the statistics for firearms, what probably got me on some of those lists, and match those statistics for performance of a firearm up in the system. It does this much damage at this much range, holds this much ammunition, and is about this accurate. And I wanted to take those numbers and plug them into a spreadsheet and get a price. And wow, that's hard. That's ridiculously hard. Because that's not how the real world works. It's not how, that's all materials and time of design. And but bigger guns cost more. Guns that shoot further do cost more. And there are a few things that do start to line up. I built a Bible for equipment construction for Hot Chicks. It was a 3-ring binder this thick. And it had formulas for creating every different kind of equipment I could imagine. And I can imagine quite a few different kinds of equipment. This is the formulas for making handguns. These are the formulas for making rifles. These are the formulas for making shotguns. These are the formulas for making swords and knives and chainsaws and clubs and baseball bats and eyeglasses and costume jewelry and cars and boats and space shuttles. And it was nothing I would ever be able to publish because it was like the ravings of a madman. If someone came at you on a subway or in the street with a book this thick, clutching it to their chest, screaming, "I've got the formulas for making everything!" you'd shoot first and call the cops later. Because it was a work of insanity. I lost my mind a little bit. But, oh my gosh, the equipment lists in Hot Chicks are beautiful and surprisingly consistent. But I really wanted everything in Hot Chicks. I started writing it and I couldn't stop. Hot Chicks is 454 pages long. That is a big book. That's a very big book. I've had people call it intimidating because it is the entry book into a role playing game and it is substantive. But while there was this consistency with the equipment, there was not a consistency with the special abilities, magic, martial arts, cyberware, now mechanica in Victory, psionics, and superpowers, now powers. So when I moved to Victory, I lost my mind again, just a little bit. Because that consistency that came to equipment at the cost of having all of these different formulas, I needed to nail down. You can purchase the Victory System Equipment Manual. It's a supplement for Victory, and you can make anything with it. That's what happens when you lose your damn mind for 7 years trying to figure out how to make things consistent. I simplified the formulas and broke everything down into conceptual Legos. So you get consistent pricing whether you're building a gun or any ammunition for that gun or the holster for that gun or the car you drive around in with your gun or the superpowers that you use to resist being shot by a gun. Everything does have a consistency. But oh my god, you don't have to go that far if you're designing your own system. You do need to have a knowledge of what you're going to put into it and what's going to be there. Does magic belong in your system? It doesn't belong in every system. There was never a magic system for Traveler, nor should there ever be a magic system for Traveler. It has psionics, and psionics shows up in a large number of places. Body replacement, prosthetics, cyberware, mechanica, strange abilities for aliens or creatures or superheroes. It doesn't necessarily belong in every game. If you're writing a system alone that you want to apply to every genre, well, it's got to have everything in it, which is why Victory includes all these things. But if your system's just nice and basic and straight and your special abilities are just going to be a part of your settings, then you can do something like the White Wolf did with their World of Darkness core book. It doesn't have any superpower or magical powers in it, but you can still use it as the basis for werewolf and vampire and mage and a whole bunch of other really interesting supernatural settings. Or any setting, really. Like I said before, you can do anything with the White Wolf core rule book. It's a good system. That's a system. How do you define a character? How do you define what the characters can do? How do you equip those characters? What do you put in their hands? What statistics does the equipment have, and how does it enhance the ability of the characters to do what they do? Special abilities, if you're going to include it at this point, and I think you should include them in system because you want them to work consistently across all your settings. At least I do, but I'm kind of obsessive about that. If Gandalf met Captain Kirk, there would be phasers versus magic, and there should be. When you're happy with your system, or when you're mostly happy with your system, it's time to talk about setting. What are you going to do today? Where are you going to go and do it? What kinds of things happen in your game? What genre of literature are you emulating? There are a lot of role-playing games. This smattering behind me is really only a sample. Fantasy, low fantasy, high fantasy, near modern, post-apocalyptic, cyberpunk, espionage, science fiction, high science fiction, space opera, military sci-fi. When it's a genre of book, you can write a role-playing game about it. Victorian romance, gothic horror, oh yeah, it's all out there. What tickles your fancy? What makes you imagine things happening? What do you sit back and watch when you want to go someplace? That's the setting you want to write. I need to talk a little bit about intellectual property. If you're going to write a setting, you want to write your own setting. You want to write something that is your own intellectual property, something that is the real estate you are creating for people. Unless you have the ability to license another intellectual property. There are role-playing games for Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Star Trek, Firefly, Marvel Superheroes, and these role-playing games based on existing intellectual properties, if they are published and for sale, are licensed. That means that there is an exchange of monies or agreements between the people who own the intellectual property and the people who are producing the game for them. There are some companies that do this better than just about anyone else. Margaret Weiss Publishing, Steve Jackson Games, they've got some really good stuff out there. If you're writing a fan project, that's never really meant to be sold or put up for market, but shared between fans for free. Write a fan project. Vic and I and other of our friends, we've applied our system to Cthulhu Tech, Star Wars. Vic and I had a really, really good run with some Mass Effect and Mobile Suit Gundam. And that's fan projects. That's fine. I have never wanted to use an intellectual property in a sole project. In fact, I've wanted to not use intellectual property in anything that I actually intended to sell. I go so far as to try to not reference intellectual properties in the books that I sell, which might be going a little bit far. If you look in the back of Hot Chicks or the Victory System core rulebook, you will find pretty big bibliographies and filmographies of the works that inspired what we did. But in the works themselves, we have kept it pretty much things out of our own heads. If you're designing a setting, design a setting. Make it your own. Make it something that you really find engaging. and make it something that you can describe without referring too much to other intellectual properties. When someone mentions to me that they are designing something and then the next 8 words out of their mouths are words that are owned by other people, I get a little twitchy. Mention a genre of literature to me, that's fine, because genres aren't copyrighted. Mention an existing intellectual property to me, and I will really, really hope that that's just a jumping off point for your creative process. When it came to inspiration for a setting for Hot Chicks, Vic and I sat down and watched a lot of bad 80s cinema. And that's really what the game is. I'm going to date myself, but I'm kind of beyond caring about it at this point. I am of the generation where when I was a junior high school youth, I would go into this thing called a video store. And there would be racks and racks of videotapes displayed on shelves for us to take home and put in our VCRs so that we could watch them. And in the 80s, there were horrible movies to watch. I am not talking about watching good cinema from the 80s, because there was good cinema from the 80s. There's good movies in any era of movie making, but oh my God, the 80s. Where if you had an empty stretch of road and a motorcycle and a couple of trucks and a lot of cardboard and spray paint, you could be in the post-apocalyptic future. And 50-gallon drums of whatever just sat on the side of the road, waiting for people to crash into them and explode for no reason. Where the heroes got bigger guns to go and deal with the bad guy at the end of the movie, and everyone had to constantly quip in one line. You think it's bad now. No, this is... Even today, there is a restraint that we have not seen since the 80s. And our sources of inspiration came from 80s fantasy movies and 80s kung fu movies and endless action pics and movies about robots and... Oh, gosh. It was a special time. It was a magical time. It was the 80s. And now, if you have played Hot Chicks or read into any of the supplements, and you walked into a video store of the past, you'd see where every bit of that game came from. Our bad guys, our settings, the aliens, the equipment, the gear, the storylines. There had to be Nazis. There had to be Nazis. Nazis are the ultimate bad guys. And demons. There had to be demons because, oh my gosh, demons are the best. Because there's a lot of those special effects pieces and aliens. Oh wow, aliens. Aliens that want our women, because that's like an entire section of the video store. Some of those in the back room where you couldn't go unless you were a mommy or a daddy who wanted to watch special videos. It was a much simpler time. And before we had the internet, and you got all of your illicit reading material hanging out at Walden Books next to the section of the author Anonymous. See, Vic and I had started publishing Standy Figures and the Hot Chicks line, as I've discussed before. And when we started to do the art books and talking about what kinds of things would be occurring around this artwork, there's this terrible world of depravity and abduction, and well, 10 billion people on the planet, and who's going to miss a few that go missing. And when we wrote that book, I got into the social commentary behind it and how we do devalue people. And over the years, it's weird that we wrote a dystopian future for 2015, and by the time 2015 came around, in the absence of aliens and demons, humanity had managed to devalue itself way further than we had anticipated it happening. But there were problems with the system in Hot Chicks. And the content of Hot Chicks was often lurid, risque, and did not appeal to a family friendly audience. Role playing games are a niche market, not everyone buys them. And so, a risque, less family friendly role playing game was a niche market within a niche market. It has never sold terribly well. It has sold. It's a silver pick at RPG now, so it's gotten its sales out there. I've made it a pay what you want title at RPG now, and people still download it at a regular basis, but it's never been a huge thing. But as a setting, I still really like it. I like that world. I like a place where there's all of these different influences working together. I wrote over 100 supplements for Hot Chicks, culminating in 2018, The War for Hell, where we tied up its storylines and are giving it some place to go from there. And we'll be booting that up later this year as a Destiny 2025 in the family-friendlier format. When you're designing your setting, it can be whatever you want it to be. It can be anything that you can imagine and contain anything you can imagine. Let's make sure it's things you imagine. We're working on the setting books for Victory now. The first one is War for the Shattered Earth, which will be our fantasy setting. We'd like to hit each of our major genres: fantasy, near modern, and sci-fi. And the process for doing this is I start with a map. I've got a title. Vic and I have been playing in the Shattered Earth on and off for years. We know what the world looks like, what it's made of, who dwells there, and now it's time to put it all in book form. So, questions I have to ask myself. How do I present this world? What does it actually boil down to? I'm really happy with the map that I've made that we're going to be using for the book. And that gives me a jumping off point. Now I can zoom in on that and place cities and talk about what makes a city and a town and a kingdom and a nation and a continent and what conflicts exist there. We wanted Shattered Earth to be a kitchen sink fantasy world, just like Hot Chicks was a kitchen sink near modern world. So it has everything in it. If it belongs in fantasy, or even if it belongs on the edge of fantasy, if it's anything that ever tagged us about fantasy, it's in there. And we've watched a lot of bad fantasy cinema, good fantasy cinema, depending on your opinion of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies, which I really liked. But then there's, In the Name of the King, a Dungeon Siege tale, and other movies. Sword and the Sorcerer, Hawk the Slayer. They're finally making a sequel to Hawk the Slayer. I'm excited. You watch the things that make fantasy fantasy. Magic? Oh yeah, gotta have magic. Martial arts? The first half of the first Conan movie was a kung fu movie. You just didn't know it. Um, Mechanica, is there cyberware? Well, yeah, actually. You get some really interesting things. You got people with bits melded onto them. Uh, got to redefine a couple of things, but yeah, yeah. That dwarf with the one really, really big arm named Punchy because that's what he does. I ran that character. That was fun. Powers? Well, yeah, you've got fantasy creatures with fantasy powers. You're not going to create dragons without some kind of superpowers. I mean, they're big superpowered lizards. Even psionics has become a staple of the fantasy genre. Thank you, D&D. But what's our twist on it? What's our bend? How does it all fit in there? Is there guild structure? You have to build a society. And what the take that we're taking on it is it's called the Shattered Earth because there was once one big continent and a war broke it into thousands of continents all over the planet. There is literally no end to the different types of things that you can encounter. So, world exploring and world building game. And that's kind of what we want. We want to be able to, well, I'm going to sail 1,000 miles that way and see what I find. And oh, look, it's an entirely new land that has never heard of me before. What am I going to do about this? It's not the only kinds of settings that people can write, of course. There's the settings with, what's the Lovecraft rating of your setting? Shattered Earth has a fairly high Lovecraft rating because the outside is a big factor in it. But is it going to be like Lovecraft 10 and the whole place is doomed by factors from the outside and horror is the state of being? Or is it Lovecraft 0 and you've got absolutely no outer cosmic horrors involved in your world? Or somewhere in between. I like to have a little Lovecraft in a game. I'm not big on Lovecraft 10 stuff, but Lovecraft 5 is pretty good. I detail the Lovecraft scale in the book Eldritch Victory. Um, and I'm actually starting to enjoy using it and applying it to other places. How much Lovecraft is in this? One of the things that's taking so long in designing the Shattered Earth is that it's not just going to be a static statement of this is what the world is like and this is what you will find if you go to this place. But I'm trying to create a number of random charts so that if you go someplace on the map that we haven't defined yet, you can find out what it is. Random. It's like a procedurally generated map for a role playing game. Want to go someplace and find, oh, what's the society? What different races dwell there? What are the issues facing the society? What kind of things can I get into? What's the adventure happening today? Well, I'm going to have to save this and replay it for myself so I can actually write that list because that was better than what I've come up with so far. A lot of my design process is dialogue with myself. I have people who I bounce things off of. I need to. My personal assistant, Devin, my writing partner, Vic, my family, if I can pin them down for long enough to care. If my son can spend 4 hours telling me about crap from Warframe, I can spend 4 hours telling him about my imaginary world where I'm going to write it down and make $1 million. Settings are where the money is when it comes to a role-playing game. The system is nice, but people don't generally go out looking for a new system. People go out and look for a new place to go and explore and do things and shoot people. So now we get to focus on the settings, and that's all good. That's all good right now. Another factor, your artwork. I am an artist. I am primarily a digital artist. I use, much to the chagrin of many people in the industry, I use Poser. It's got a reputation as being a little bit too easy to use and not giving professional results. I don't just use out of the box Poser. I've been using Poser for since 1998. Just about, yeah, yeah. Uh, I've upgraded every time it's come up. I started with Poser 2. I'm using Poser Pro 2014 at the moment, or 2015, I forget. I just keep the upgrades going. I've dropped, God, somewhere on the order of $25,000 on third-party content over the years. Different ways to render and textures and models, and I've been refining my technique for a long time. And then once I've got a image rendered, I take it into Photoshop and finish it, make it smooth where it's not smooth, and add effects. I'll do stuff straight out of Photoshop now. Draw. I've got a Wacom Cintiq tablet over here that I am going to wear clean through one of these days, because that is where my art gets done. I'm finding a lot of use out of the Adobe Creative Suite. It's $50 a month if you're buying it straight. Students can use it for a lot less, but it includes Photoshop and InDesign, where I do all my page layout, and Premiere and After Effects, what I use to edit these videos, sound editing, and all kinds of industry standard professional creative software. You need something to lay out your pages in, do your typing and do your corrections. InDesign has grown up a lot. My mom started using Aldus PageMaker in 1984 when she started her desktop publishing company in our basement, and did a tremendous job with it. I've never seen anything go so successful so fast. She landed Anheuser-Busch as a client early on, and that helped a lot. But I learned a lot from my mom and her ridiculously perfectionistic attitude. She's a Mac user, but we still get along. It's all good. But InDesign is the latest version of what Aldus PageMaker has become over the years. It allows me to do my creative typing, my spell check, and all my page layout at the same time. Not how everyone uses it, but I enjoy using it. It also exports to PDF, and then I can put that straight up for sale. There's a choice you have to make when you set out, and especially when you're considering your artwork. Is this going to eventually be printed on paper? I sell through RPG Now, a division of One Bookshelf Incorporated. And I sell primarily PDF files, to be viewed electronically, meant to be viewed electronically from the time of conception. So I can do full color art and plaster it in. Selling Hot Chicks as a PDF is not a big deal. It's full of color art all through the whole thing. 454 pages, but it's just data. I wanted to print a copy of Hot Chicks, so I've got a physical copy. Printed a few, took it to lulu.com for print on demand, and I learned a couple of things. The Victory System core rulebook is around 200 pages long, and I made all of its artwork black and white because I really wanted hard copy. I wanted to print those and offer them for print. To print a copy of Hot Chicks, the role-playing game, the base cost before I get it cut is about $90. Full color interior art, soft cover, 454 pages. To print a copy of the Victory System core rulebook, less than 200 pages, black and white, grayscale interior art, hardcover, is about $11. If you are going to produce a book that you want printed, leave your interior art black and white. and keep it reasonably lengthed. That is one reason that we split up. We had thought that our sequel to Hot Chick was going to be a Shattered Earth book that combined our new system and the setting all at the same time, and now we split it up. Split it up to keep everything reasonable. And it has paid off because a lot of material has been written for Victory that I really wanted to get out of the way before we put out a big setting book. There's a lot of backup material, books on Mechanica and the powers and magic that fill out some of the lists that we had in Victory because we kept it reasonable. If you're just going to produce it as a PDF for electronic, knock yourself out. You will need someone who can write, someone who can edit, someone to do page layout, and someone to do art. These can't all be the same person. It rarely is. In the industry, I'm actually considered a quadruple threat. But you can farm it out a little bit. Just remember to compensate everyone involved. You will need software and hardware. You don't need super top of the line $1,000 desktop machines. Editing software and writing software runs just fine on a $300 machine as well as it runs on a $2,000 machine. You can get a lot of this done on a laptop. Hell, you can get most of the writing done on your phone if you don't really appreciate your thumbs and want to punish them. The art, well, that's up to the artist how they want to do it. That might require a better system. I do a lot of 3D rendering for my art, so I have a better system, but that's me. And I've been told I'm somewhat unique about that. Lied to by a couple of company owners who said they didn't use that kind of art just before they put out books that used that kind of art. I won't name names. But I have reviewed his book. Putting it all together, making sure everything looks good, and there's things that I didn't think of when I started going into this. Lessons hard learned. You want page numbers. Oh, you want page numbers. You want page numbers in a good spot. You don't want to Cthulhu Tech the page numbers. You want page numbers where people expect to find them. You might not need to index your book. You will need a table of contents in that book. You will want a page of credits because even if you're the only person who worked on it, you want people to recognize the work that you did in it. You want, if you are publishing as a PDF, you want to bookmark the crap out of that thing. You want people to be able to pull up the bookmarks tab and go straight to the content that they want to find in your book. You don't want people to have to flip back and forth for, where's my weapons? No, you want a tab. You want engaging sales text. And you want to promote. I am bad at promoting my games. Very bad. I've got over 200 products up on RPG now. If I was good at promoting, that would give me like a living wage. And at the moment, it's still cheeseburger money. But you can change that by buying my books and visit my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/ScottCorum and consider becoming a supporter because every cent helps. these videos are one way that I'm promoting myself as well. If anyone would like to pick them up and run with them, oh, circulate the tapes. Post my videos everywhere. Go right ahead, please. I I really, really would like to actually make a living at this at some point in time. That being said, if you publish your own role-playing games, you're probably not going to make a living at it. Not at the beginning, maybe not for a while. If you've got the backing of a big company, that's one thing. If you're an indie and you're good at promoting, you've got a shot. If anyone would like to help me promote, leave me a message. In the meantime, this has been a little bit of a meander. There's a lot involved in designing a game and conceptualizing it, whether you're just doing a setting or just doing a system or doing it all in one book. And I encourage more people to try. Find what sparks you. Find what makes you want to explore and play. Science fiction, fantasy, westerns. Live a little. Watch some movies. Go to an amusement park. See where you are missing I went to Disneyland for years planning a running gun battle down Main Street because that would be awesome. And then, kung fu fight up the side of the Matterhorn, and maybe even, some kind of, they would never be able to get away with this, not ever, but can you just imagine two people on one of the little boats in Small World having a katana fight all the way through with the music going in the background? Maybe that's just me. But find what sparks you, find where you're missing action, and fill it in. I want competition. I want a big, thriving indie role-playing game industry. I want people making games because I want to play in some of those games, and I want a huge, rich world where people have formats for sharing their imaginations, person to person, mind to mind, one to one, or in a group. I want that format of creativity to thrive. Write some games. I'm going to keep writing mine. Speaking of which, I do probably need to get back to that. So, for now, I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me. And I'll see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.